Hello, this is Graham. In this video, I'm going to briefly explore the nature of transitions as they're experienced by all of us. Do we feel a pain of becoming or the pleasure of being? Do we experience them as a breakdown or a breakthrough? Do we feel that they're a crisis or an opportunity? Before we begin, I'd like you to take a couple of minutes reflecting. Pause the video and think back over your life. Try to identify one or two big transitions. What do you remember of the time? Are your memories strongest from before the transition, during it, or afterwards? Now try to get in touch with your feelings at the time. What do you remember feeling? Was this mainly in the build-up or in the aftermath? When you've had a couple of minutes and the chance to record your thoughts, start the video again. The first instar of the lunar moth develops from an egg laid on the leaf of a tree. When the first instar has grown and grown from egg to form a larvae, it sheds its skin completely and becomes a second instar. It grows again and goes through the same process. In the transition from the third to the fourth instar, it even loses its face. As the fourth instar, it builds a cocoon around itself. Inside the cocoon, it goes through an even more remarkable transformation, effectively dissolving itself and reforming. After 4 weeks, it emerges from the cocoon as a partially grown moth. While attached to a leaf, its wings develop until it's capable of flying to a tree and another leaf, where it will lay its own eggs, and the cycle will repeat. Moths communicate at a sound frequency of around 200 kHz. Humans can hear up to about 25 kHz, but bats, their principal predator, can hear around 125 kHz. When a moth is in distress, it emits screams, which have been recorded and are said to sound like those of a human in extreme pain. It does this especially when it's emerging from the cocoon. Transition for the moth is, we deduce, extremely painful. People suffering from depression and grief often refer to themselves as experiencing pain. This is as debilitating a pain as the one that they experience when they suffer a physical injury. However, until the last decade or so, the medical community has denied that this is actually pain. Pain is a defense mechanism. From an evolutionary perspective, it plays a very useful role, warning us of possible threats to our well-being. The sensory part, known as nociception, is often linked to a movement reflex. We feel something sharp, so we try to remove our body from it. The affective part is where we turn this into an emotional response. We need this in order to experience suffering. We know that mammals and birds experience pain, as do amphibians and fish, and increasingly there's evidence that invertebrates, like the lunar moth, can too. Physiologically, we know that to experience pain, 2 areas of the brain are involved. The sensory center in the somatosensory cortex, and the affective center in the anterior cingulate and insular cortices. These areas are not only spatially apart, but they also operate independently of one another. Under various circumstances, it's possible for someone to know that they are being hurt, but not to experience any pain. While it's easy to envisage the pathway for experiencing physical pain, we don't fully understand how psychic pain gets referred to the affective center, but there's strong evidence that it is. Lewin was one of the pioneers of social psychology, and Rogers, Pearls, and Maslow all acknowledged the impact that he had on their own thinking. He also met and impressed Eric Trist, one of the founders of the Tavistock Institute in London. He studied change on an institutional and cultural level, but generally achieved this through individuals. He pioneered the use of experiential tea groups, described by Rogers as the most significant social invention of the century. A form of group training where participants, typically between 8 and 15 people, learn about themselves and about small group processes in general through their interaction with one another. Of his many ideas, Lewin put forward a very simple way of thinking about change happening, largely at the institutional level. Fundamentally, he took the view that if there were sufficient pressures to change rather than resistances to it, then it would happen. This force field used language that people could relate to, but was also open to some rather simplistic interpretations. In terms of individual change, you would think that if they were in a dire situation and there was a greener grass elsewhere, then people would almost immediately opt for the better pasture. But of course we all know that this doesn't always happen. Many of our clients come to us in pain. Their lives are in chaos. Change is happening. It feels out of control. They feel as though their whole identity is crumbling away. Indeed, it could often be said to be doing so. They may be having panic attacks and may grasp at every straw that they can think would help them. Their pain is palpable. Others arrive stuck. They can't make a decision. They're terrified of losing what they have and see the new world as an abyss into which they will almost certainly fall and perish. Their fear of the pain is so strong that they'll endure unbelievable hardship in order not to experience even worse. After all, it couldn't possibly be better to be free from this terrible space. They may even see suicide as their only escape. Pain and transition go hand in hand. I'd like to ask you to reflect for a moment again. Make a list of the things that you are, beginning each with the statement, I am. So I am male, I am white, I am university educated, I teach at Abingdon and Whitney College, I have a kind and caring partner, I live in a village in Oxfordshire, and so on. When you begin to run out of things to say, put a line through all of those that rely on some kind of external validation. Whether someone perceives that their life is in chaos, or they are fearful of it becoming so, we have 3 strategic priorities to supporting them. We help them develop approaches to self-soothe, ways of stopping their minds from accelerating into a catastrophizing downward spiral. We help them to develop an internally defined sense of self, no longer dependent on external factors or possessions, but instead to find meaning of their own. As members of a humanistic school of philosophy, we believe that meaning is something that we make in our lives by attributing meaning to the experiences that we have. So the third focus of our work will be on helping them discover their personal direction and define meaning in that without external judgment. The term agency gets used in different ways according to your approach to it, philosophical, behavioural, psychotherapeutic, or whatever. When we use it, we tend to mean the subjective awareness of initiating, executing, and controlling one's own volitional actions in the world. Volition means determination or will or purpose. Someone with a high personal agency has a sense of control in their life. A person with a limited sense of personal agency feels that their life is out of their control. Our sense of being in control is not objective. One researcher observed that when gambling with dice, players rolled with more force when they wanted a high number and less when they wanted a low number, even though this would have no impact on the dice. Thus they felt that they had more agency over the dice than they actually did. Before you laugh at that, How often have you pushed a button more than once on a pedestrian crossing? Our sense of personal agency can fluctuate and vary with situations. Though we build up an overall impression, this flavours our perception of most situations. Agency is very important in some clinical settings. Schizophrenics, for example, may have such a limited sense of personal agency that they believe that their hands are writing with pen, but they themselves have no control over what they're writing. Stroke patients, individuals with obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, and with aging-related degenerative conditions, all can experience challenges with agency. The most important application of agency in our work as counsellors lies in enabling our clients to take responsibility for their lives. In our society, we assume that people have free will, and therefore that they can assume responsibility for their actions. Often a client doesn't feel that they have the freedom to take responsibility for their life, and it's our job to support them in shaping and changing that perception. Working alongside agency, but not the same thing, is optimism. The relationship between optimism, agency, and positive outcomes is quite complex, and it's a bit of a hot topic of research right now. We used to think that people who were most realistic, neither overly optimistic nor excessively pessimistic, were more likely to be successful. However, the evidence suggests that people who see things as they would like them to be, in other words, have positive illusions and small distortions of reality that make things appear better than they are, tend to be more psychologically healthy.